Thanks. All right, let's go ahead and do a roll call.
Okay, Miss Allard. I do see Miss Allard in the queue or in the list of guests. Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Miss Kennedy. Miss Kennedy. Okay, Miss LaFrance. And that little ding is Desiree is still admitting people into the meeting, so we can circle back and see if any members have arrived. Mr. Perez-Verdilla.
I'm here, thanks.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zolatel.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Miss Allard. Okay, Mr. Chair, I believe you're missing Miss Kennedy.
Here.
Oh, Miss
There's
Kennedy
a lot
is
of
here.
feedback.
There is a lot of feedback, I agree. Mr. Weddleton, are you with us? Mr. Chair, it looks like you're missing Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, got it. And then if we can just make sure that we are all on mute until we're speaking, that would help with some of the feedback issues. Okay, so just like normal, feel free to text me or put yourself in the chat if you want to be added to the queue. And like we would normally do in person, I would like this committee meeting to be more informal. So for Miss Allard, who I do see that she is in our list of participants, so I'm going to assume that she can hear me. And so this committee, the Rules Committee, is a committee where we have conversations on our priorities and work towards our priorities. We do a lot of roundtable of sharing, whether it's committees or individual legislation that we're working on, in an attempt for us to collaborate more and share more information. And then we have open discussion on a variety of topics. For this meeting, though, the agenda is going to be simple. It's open discussion on 3 different topics. I am going to start, though, with an Assembly Chair report and just talk briefly and keep everyone in the loop on discussions that I have had in the last, really the last 24 hours with the Assembly Department leadership on sort of what does it look like for us to mirror the city's plan to reopen. And I'll speak about it in 2 terms. So first, the clerk's office, and then second, the regular assembly meetings in the chambers. So for the clerk's office, we are going to be looking closely and following whatever guidelines that the mayor puts out. So we're not going to be stepping in front of the mayor's calls for folks to work at home. Likely we'll get information hopefully today on that, but it's probably going to be another 2 to 4 weeks of work at home for City Hall employees, and that'll mean the clerk's office as well. Then when it comes to regular assembly meetings, I think until larger public gatherings are allowed, it doesn't make any sense to reopen the chambers to the public. But I also want to acknowledge that the current situation can sometimes be very difficult for folks on the phone. And then when we have a majority of folks on the phone at home, it can be pretty difficult. And it also can be somewhat difficult for the public, and the extra work that the clerk's office has to do there can make it difficult. So I have begun conversations, want to emphasize begun conversations on what it looks like to switch our regular assembly meetings to virtual meetings. I will say we won't be in the forefront on this. The Juneau Assembly is actually having all of their meetings, their regular assembly meetings virtually. Many jurisdictions in the lower 48 are doing that. Our target date to try to figure out all of these logistics and see if it's possible is the meeting of May 19th. So we're going to have 2 more meetings, this upcoming Tuesday one and the May 5th meeting, where we're going to continue operating like we normally have, with potential for some significant change on the meeting of May 19th. Just want to reassure everyone that we are working through sort of every detail and procedure to ensure accessibility, transparency, and functionality for not only us, but members of the public. So any questions on anything that I've talked about?
I'm in the queue.
Yeah, Mr. Constant.
That's my bad. There you go. I have a bit of heartburn with the idea that in the end of May, we're going to be changing our format to not being in person. And when everything else is moving the other way. And I had heartburn a month ago when I was told you can't come to a meeting. And I don't know that I am supportive in principle or in fact of any move to do that. And in fact, I believe that we should be looking to the guidance coming from the administration if we are going to be seeing crowds can now be a little bit larger as long as they're socially distanced, etc., that we should be moving that way instead of the other way. So that's where I'm going to come down. I think it would be crazy for us to shut down our public meetings at the end of May when everything else is opening up.
Sure. So I have a few other folks in the queue. Ms. Solotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say I somewhat echo Mr. Constant's sentiment. I really miss being able to, like in this meeting or any meeting we have, get the visual feedback and the public, quite honestly, of what we're talking about. It's so it's a missing essential component, I feel like, of this work. I don't know what. I don't getting any nonverbal cues as to what you are all thinking. My dogs all think I'm brilliant, but beyond that, I really can't tell, if that joke landed or not. So I really need, if you're exploring this, to have a video or visual component. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to just go through the queue and then respond after. Ms. Allard?
Okay. Yeah, I have to echo the same feeling with Ms. Zalatel and Mr. Constant. I believe that we owe it to our constituents and to the public. If the rest of our community is opening up, and as leaders within the community, they deserve the respect that they can see us, that we're there communicating in person, and that we follow the guidelines with the rest of the country as far as opening up slowly. But if you're talking about switching it halfway towards the end of May to go reverse the back way, that's not sending the right message. That's all.
Thanks. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first I will say Ms. Salatel's joke did bring a smile, so I wanted to know that there was at least one smiling face in the crowd. But I have to echo the same that the last 3 speakers have said, simply because my biggest concern about what we were doing to begin with was the message that was going to the public, the message that we were sequestered off somewhere. We didn't want the public involvement. And it is difficult for people to understand when you tell them, oh, sorry, you're not allowed to come in here. So when we did completely lock down the LUSAC chambers without any thought about how we could do it to at least let some people in really did start to cause a lot of concern and questions for the public. And I heard that. So I don't want to see us move to something that's even further remote. The other thing is, I think there might be a little bit of, I don't know if the term is accountability or credibility, but one of the things that I am concerned about is if people begin to question who's actually on the phone. You can't prove that necessarily. I mean, I know we tried to do that at least through the elections, but it is difficult for people to really be able to trust what and verify what's happening at the assembly level if they can't see what's really going on. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a one question on the chat. When you had said virtual, I assume you meant video-based, Zoom, WebEx, Teams, or something like that. And then I just had a comment that, Crystal, it was a little bit hard to hear you when you were speaking. It was coming through on my end anyway as a bit muffled. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton?
Yeah, thanks. Let's see, can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm muted or not.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, if I come out muffled, it's, these masks, they always muffle me. I would like to see us open up as much as we can. And I know there have been in years past when there was some huge issue and not enough people could even fit in the chambers that we used the Wilda Marston for, and this is before I was on the assembly, but years ago, where people could watch it on a screen there and then if they wanted to testify or something, run in to testify. But I'd rather head that way and use some kind of maybe that leader to spread people out more and have us more open and present. Done.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see anyone else in the queue, so I'll just respond. And yeah, thank everyone for your comments on that. I will say when we discussed this, the frame that I used, and I'll just reiterate, is that as the city opens, sort of consider how we do that as well and mirror that. And so the intention behind the possibility of switching over to some types of virtual, and to answer Ms. LaFrance's question, Suzanne's question, sorry, informal, yes, video-based, but I think we likely are some ways away from being able to have large public gatherings. Right now, from what the clerk tells me, there's about 20 people who attend the meetings, and right now, large gatherings, I think in this phase 1 is going to be 20 people. And we don't know yet sort of when we're going to be moving on to the next phase. Will that next phase be 50 people? And at that point, does it make sense for us to open up the assembly meetings to the public? These are all, I think, evolving questions. And so I think the idea was, in the interim, what can we do to be more accessible and to work better? And maybe people have overstated their the difficulty that they're having at the assembly meetings, but I did hear that some difficulties at the assembly meetings that I'm not hearing today, on difficulty of hearing, participating, and some other issues. And so the idea was that this might be a better way for us to have our meetings and be able to be accessible to the public as well. I don't want to belabor this too much because we have other, I think, really important topics. I will, you all know how I operate. I will listen to the body, and if the body is telling me a clear message, then that is the message that I will follow. So we don't really need to belabor this too much more. Mr. Constant?
I would just briefly note that having been in the chambers, I can tell you there are no problems when you're in the chambers, even though everything is spread out.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just point out that even Ms. LaFrance said she had trouble hearing me. There are some issues that we would have to figure out how to address just to be able to make sure that we're understanding each other. So, and what's being spoken. So thanks.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on then in our agenda and move on to discussion on the alcohol tax. So first, just want to set the frame and sort of understanding the reality that we are in right now and the hardship that this industry and many other industries are facing. I think it was a really wise decision of the body to implement this in February of 2021 as the start date. So we have two pieces to talk about today. First is the implementation ordinance and the work that's been going on around that, and just let you know a little bit about the timetable there. And then second is the public process, and as we committed to in the resolution, AR 2020-41. And that resolution, in short, laid out the need to have committee meetings or work sessions as every other month. I think the timetable that we are going to present is, I think, a little bit more aggressive than that. And then three town hall meetings to occur before the public hearings of the 2021 FY 2021 budget, which will happen in late October, early November. Those are when those two public hearings occur. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Forrest to talk about the implementation. And then after that, Austin will talk about the public process.
I think we had a little bit of a miscommunication, Felix. I thought you were going to talk about the implementation. So if you're referring to the ordinance that the mayor's team is coming forward, I suppose I could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, that's what I was referring to.
Okay. Well, we've been in contact with Dan Moore, the treasurer, and he and his team has been reaching out to the alcohol industry. And the administration has indicated that they are going to put forward an ordinance that would basically just set up the mechanics of how the tax is collected. So not the much longer process where we decide how to spend the money, but the more technical process on, how will this actually look like in practice? There was talk about bonding, but I think the industry thinks that isn't necessary. And I believe that the administration is planning on putting that forward in June. And I guess from my perspective, I think it's just really important that we as a body are speaking clearly and explaining to folks that doesn't mean the alcohol tax goes into effect in June. That's when we start having that technical discussion with between the administration and us and the industry on how it's collected. And then the administration has also said that they would like 6 months to sort of set up the system. So if you work backwards from February, that means that they'd like to have the ordinance passed by about August.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dunbar, I have a question for you, and you may not be able to answer this, but if you wouldn't mind taking it back to them, or I can send it in an email if you'd prefer I do that. But sure. One of the questions that I had was, is there any consideration for a provision in the putting together the mechanics of how that works that would allow for a business to offset their initial business costs to setting up some kind of an accounting system or however it is they need to do at their level? Will there be the ability for a business to basically reduce the amount of taxes that they turn in by the amount of money that it costs them to set up their systems for accounting for that?
It's not a conversation we've had. I can certainly ask them. I think John might be able to speak to John, what kind of costs are there when you're in a retail business and you have to implement a sales tax? I don't want to put him on the spot, but I know he's spoken to it in the past.
John, you're on mute.
Well, at any rate, yeah, Crystal, I'm happy to bring that motion to the administration. Oh,
I don't think I'm a good person to talk to about this because I hear about all the huge trauma and expense of switching it. And my experience is any point of sale system or even a cheap cash register you get, you have to, in this city, turn off the sales tax function. It would take me about 5 minutes at each of my stores to turn on a tax for any item that I sell in the store. So, but my point of sale system is about 20 years old, so maybe things remain more complicated.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Yeah, but Crystal, I'm happy to bring that question to the administration.
Thanks. Chris?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just I would add, I believe that that's one of the powers that we have granted ourselves through the ordinance process. So we will have that talk, whether the administration supports it or not, it's one thing, but I believe we have the power to offer that.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just for clarification, Alex Slivka put in the chat box that the administration, and I'm just reading from the earlier communications, is looking to introduce this on June 2nd and have a public hearing and vote on June 23rd. So at least that's the timeline that the administration is requesting to give them that 6 months. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to public process, which I think is what more people are likely interested in. Austin, you want to walk us through that?
Sure, thanks, Felix. Since I see Mr. Slivka is on the line, I'll wish him a happy birthday, and I know it's Ira's birthday today too, so we have a lot of birthdays going on. So Felix sort of introduced the idea, which is that we'll start talking about it today and introduce the idea to everyone. And then we'd like, and this is just what we've proposed, consistent with what Meg put forward in the resolution that we all approved on the night that we put this language on the ballot, that we decided to put this language on the ballot. So we could do something else, but this is what we designed that we think meets those goals. So having a scheduled work session next month, an assembly work session where we would begin a more detailed discussion of how the alcohol tax revenue should be spent. And so while the Muni is working on figuring out how to collect it, obviously there's the, you know, I was going to say $1 million question, but $11 to $15 million question of who, you know, how we spend that money. So start talking about that in May as a group. Then we were thinking that it would make sense to split out additional discussions of that by committee. So we propose that in June, we send it to the Health Policy Committee. That committee probably would want to focus its discussion on objectives like treatment or prevention of child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, potentially other topics. And the idea would be that at each committee, the committee bounces around some ideas and comes up with its priorities in order to tackle the challenges that are related to its committee. So we were thinking health policy in June to kick it off, in July if the chairs are amenable, scheduling homelessness and public safety committee discussions on the same topic, of course with more of a focus on all the issues related to homelessness and then public safety respectively. After that, we wanted to regroup again as a body to have another work session and discuss all of the ideas and priorities that were distilled in those committees. And then after that work session in August, have 3 town hall meetings where we present to the public our collective ideas and priorities and get feedback on those. And then we're thinking after those town halls, you know, late August, early September, we would get together, have a final work session with all of the members, and then shape our plan from there. I see Ms. Salatel has a question.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Meg.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, the question is, I guess I would, from a committee perspective, I'm just trying to think this through. I think it's a way to get public engagement on the issue in addition to the town halls. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I would like to be able to put it on like the committee's agenda for maybe May, June, July, just to like kind of put a little bit of time out there to kind of let it evolve, because it is a big first budget. And then I just think that might be a bit more informative. So I just wanted to toss that idea out there.
So would that be, thanks for the feedback, would that be putting it for each of those committees, making it the agenda item for the 3 months? Because I just wonder I guess we could members of those committees whether they feel that, it is a big chunk of money and it's a new thing, so it makes sense to talk about it. But I just want to make sure we're not forcing chairs to, steer away from other things they might otherwise do.
Oh, yeah, no, totally to the discretion of the chair and the committee. I'm just thinking that, like, with the Committee on Homelessness, it's sometimes better if we devote a small amount of time to something repeatedly instead of making it the primary focus of an entire meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does anyone else have feedback on that? I mean, I think Forrest or Felix, do you have feedback?
From my perspective, I think it could work if you want to split it around to different meetings. I do think, though, that sort of logistically, it makes sense if for one of the meetings you set that aside to have the subject matter experts, as was laid out in your resolution, Meg, come in and talk and sort of help mold the conversation. But otherwise, if the intent is to try to get public participation throughout this process, I think that works.
If I may, yeah, that's a great point, Felix. I appreciate that. And I think having this conversation in the homelessness arena during the summer will actually be quite relevant, likely. So.
All right. Crystal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm a little bit fuzzy on how this is really what this is going to be about at this point. I don't have a problem with having, the public engagement piece. I'm a little concerned about the idea of telling the public that we have, potentially an $11 to $15 million budget, considering the potential economic health of our community not being what it used to be. So I guess my question in that is this just the process of trying to maybe prioritize some of the things that we would want to do, and then a year from now, when we know what kind of funding we actually will have, then we can start to say, okay, we can apply the funding to this number one priority. So just some clarification maybe on what the exercise for the summer will really be trying to pin down. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think what we'll continue to do is just work with the administration to see where the numbers are looking. It's obviously going to depend on how Anchorage recovers and when. As you know, this tax isn't implemented until next year. So there, is some question about where we'll be in February of 2021. So I think we would keep monitoring that, but then at the same time, as you said, really identify our priorities in each of those buckets. And that's really what this process is for us to take time talking about the priorities, and then the public to have an opportunity, many opportunities, the way we've set it up, to weigh in on those priorities. And then I'll say one more thing. I see Chris is in the queue. But one more thing I wanted to add is the reason we set it up on the schedule is that, as you know, in late August, or maybe September, Alex could probably speak to that, or Lance if he's here, but that's when the administration starts putting together its budget. And so we really want to be on the front of defining those priorities and weighing in before they did that for us in their budget process.
All right, thank you. Yes, and I do appreciate the timeline on that, because obviously we don't want to pick the times of the year when we know we already have a whole lot of other things to talk about and deal with. So I appreciate the kind of the summertime approach to having conversations with the public. So thanks.
Great, thanks, Crystal.
Thanks. Forrest, did you want to weigh in on any of those conversations?
No, I think that was all well stated, particularly Austin's point about, it's true that we don't have the money in hand, but all of our budgets are obviously built on projection. And so we'll just have to work closely with the administration before October to figure out what exactly the number we're talking about. But we know there's going to be some non-zero, probably significant number. And I just think this has been a good conversation in terms of, laying out our process.
And I think if I can add, thinking back about Meg's comment to the committees, I think that it would be mostly June and July that we're exploring that if we want to do the town halls in August. So do you think those 2 months, June and July, would be sufficient? Because we'd want to do it after we had our meeting in May, although we could try to change, finagle that schedule to accommodate even more committee meetings.
If that was to me, I think 2 would be good. If that's what we have, that's what we have. And then we can just plan accordingly. And it would be good to, start with a framework coming out of a work session potentially of what the assembly is thinking. Sometimes that elicits more specific and direct feedback.
Great.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. Just speaking to the notion that we don't understand where the revenues are going and we may not see the kind of revenues we anticipate. I would offer that while that may be true from the bars because they aren't operating, the liquor stores have been experiencing record sales. And so I think it's going to come out pretty much as a wash, but we'll see, of course.
That's a good point. I know that's certainly the case in my house. See, Meg, you can't see anyone laughing.
All right. Any other questions on the alcohol tax before we move on to the next topic?
My laughter was muted.
So is mine.
Just for the record, there are a lot of people lolling in the chat. All right. So seeing no other questions on the alcohol tax, then we'll look forward to a May work session where we can start digging into it. So next topic, getting back to business, and I guess this sort of echoes what I had said earlier, which is, as the city reopens, we need to start thinking about how we reopen as well and get back to our own business. So there are 3 topics under this that I'd like to talk about. First is committee meetings, second is legislation in general, and then third is work sessions. So starting with committee meetings, I had a good conversation with the clerk's office because we know that our committees are many times incumbent on having the staffing to actually do them. And right now, about half of the staff are trained to do Teams meetings, and at least through May, we're likely going to do all of our committee meetings on Teams. And aside from that, many staff working from home are strained in other ways, and I think we can all relate to that, right? So it's important that our meetings be professional and functional. So what I am proposing and want to have a discussion around is the idea that for May, that the only committees that meet are those that fit in sort of 2 buckets. One that have something COVID-19 related to talk about, and then 2 that are timely and related to assembly priorities. And I think both of those functions need to exist. If it's not timely, it can wait. My hope is that in June, we get back to a place where all of our staff are trained up and ready to do Teams, and we're maybe a little bit more back to normal, and we can start running all of our committees again. So open it up for thoughts on that proposal. I'll just give it another second, but I'm not seeing any. Mr. Weddleton, John.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I suppose that makes sense, but we have some things that are in front of us, and the example, there's some things, I guess a marijuana license may come up, and it has a time constraint for a Community Economic Development Committee, and And that would be something that's not necessarily C-19 related, but it does have a timeliness. But there's also some things we're looking at for, we kind of ended a discussion of, didn't end it, we abruptly stopped discussing some fee changes that hit certain industries fairly hard. And that's something that's still very relevant to those industries, you know, plumbing and roofing and things like that, that take multiple inspections that they weren't generally prepared for. And then the home builders have a number of things that they've been asking about for probably over a year, and we're just starting to get on those. And then we got kind of stopped by the COVID-19, but those are things that are still important, and I wouldn't want to necessarily stop discussing those for even longer. I mean, what's your sense on those?
Sure. So, you know, from what you're telling me, right, that seems to fit in the timeliness category of, and potentially in the COVID category too, if we're talking about sort of economic measures when you're talking about fees and other things. So, you know, I think a lot of those things make sense to me just on first blush, that we should be able to discuss those things. I think what would cause a sort of caution for me is if it turns into sort of, now we have to meet every week to talk about these things. I would want us to sort of use caution on over meeting, if that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. I don't like over meeting.
All right. Going next to Jamie. I think you're muted, Jamie.
Oh, okay. So I have a concern. I don't want over meetings as well. I agree with that. My concern is that we don't stop business as usual. You know, we need to be able to be heard by the community, and they should be involved and to not discuss topics that are hot for some businesses and maybe others aren't interested. That's fine. But I don't understand, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of getting confused on why we would not continue business as usual the best that we can.
Yeah, and sorry, maybe I should have explained this better. So all of our committee meetings were canceled for March and April. So this is us actually going back to business as usual.
So then if we're going back to business as usual, what actually is the problem?
So the problem, as has been described by the clerk's office, is at least in the short term, right? We're just talking about May, but in the short term, the staffing capacity to be able to run all of these committees. That's the issue that was described to me. There was a lot of caution, and I don't know if Jennifer, you want to talk to this, but a lot of caution about sort of just doing all of our committee meetings again, and sort of the ability for the clerk's office to do that.
Sure, Mr. Chair, this is Jennifer. I can speak to that. Like the chair said, the majority of our staff is trying to work from home. We have staff members that are assigned to each of your committees. Desiree and I do several committees, but we have other staff members as well. They haven't been trained on how to facilitate a virtual committee meeting, and there are things that go along with that as far as changing our noticing, excuse me, and just some other processes. So we're trying to go back to business as usual, but business is different, and we need to be able to train staff to help you guys do those committees.
Thank you, Jennifer. I guess I would say then we need to implement some standing operating procedure on contingency plan. So if anything like this arises in the future, we don't have such a delay, and that everybody within the municipality, to include the staff, understand what the contingency plan is in case this happens again, and then we don't have to delay our committee meetings in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Point well taken. Meg?
Excuse me. Thank you. Yes, I agree with having some kind of standing procedure. And I can tell you, if I cancel the Committee on Homelessness again, I won't survive the storm because it got a really vehement reaction when we canceled last month. So I'm happy to, and actually I would like to hear from the clerks, maybe not today, but over the course of maybe the next weeks, what's the preferred platform from them? To me, telephone seems to maybe be the easiest, but I don't know. I don't understand 100% what challenges each of the potential platforms present. So if they have recommendations for particular committees that they're familiar with that they think the best virtual platform would be, that would be fantastic, because I am certainly no expert and I want to balance whatever work is being placed on the clerk's office with public accessibility with getting the committee meeting going. Thank you.
Thanks. Did you want to talk about that, Jennifer?
I think that we're leaning towards continuing with our Teams platform for the committees. Now that we feel like we have a handle on work sessions, I think we'll use the same, we'll use what we've learned going through the process of using Teams for your work sessions to do your committees. And then I know the chair is going to work on just some ideas, or I guess for lack of a better word, guidelines to help the chairs facilitate public comment during your committee meetings, because you're the ones that'll be managing the chat, and you'll see in your participant list all the public that are calling in that show up as phone numbers. So there are some challenges in figuring out how that best works for your committee to call on those people to speak or to participate how you want them to.
Thanks. Chris?
Yep, thank you. So on this one, I'm somewhat torn. I recognize the challenge of staffing and logistics, and I also recognize the impulse I have that says, open the doors, we got to get to work. And between those two realities is that I think a reasonable request the chair is making, in whatever context you use by which you would kind of benchmark a decision to say, I think we need to have a committee meeting. Timeliness really is a very judgmental kind of element that you can make as a chair, that this is timely because of X or Y. And I think it would have to be a pretty unreasonable request for the members, because ultimately it comes to the members who have the power to say yes or no, to say no. And so I think that this approach is actually quite reasonable. I know that I have a number of items that I'm not prepared to put into the hopper, some have heard about, because they'll create such public comment that I don't want us to do this debate in a time when the public can't participate fully. And so to me, I have my own calculus for what drives me to say this item needs to get on the table. And I think that we're all reasonable people and we can figure this out just through our regular course of business. Thank you.
Thanks. John?
Well, we've talked, I think mostly focused on constraints on the assembly clerks and our side, but also administration, from the kind of items I mentioned on the Community Economic Development Committee, like Bob Dole has switched over to mostly doing COVID-19 things. And I think it's taken a lot of attention from Slivka and others, and of course Falsey and so on, Shooty. So there are constraints on their side as we kind of open up more. So I think there are topics that is more in response to Jamie's question on why we would go slow. It's just kind of, that's part of the reality.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to mention this when we talked about legislation, about conversations I've had with Jason Backenstad, Chief of Staff, and Kate Vogel, the municipal attorney. So I'll get to that because I have talked with the administration about their capacities. Austin?
Thanks, Felix. I just wanted to add quickly that as Jennifer or Felix or others are talking about what we're doing with our committee meetings, that could change. So I don't think Felix means to give the impression that, that's what we'll be doing in June or July. This is sort of a moving target. We're going to see what the mayor is announcing, while we're in this meeting right now, and those things might change, right, Felix?
Yeah, so there's definitely, a hope, and I think, I'm hearing a push for certain things to happen. But I think we it's important for us to be nimble as well, because I mean, no one has a crystal ball. We don't know what the situation is going to look like a week from now.
And then, Mr. Chair, have you Felix, have you let everyone know what committees they're chairing? I know you've had a lot of discussions, but that probably plays into this because people are waiting for all that to be confirmed to evaluate whether their committee should meet or not.
Yes, yeah, all of that has been confirmed. I don't think the clerk's office has sort of sent out the official notice yet. Maybe you have, Jennifer, but that has all been confirmed.
Okay, great. And then for me personally, I think Pete and I are going to chair the legislative committee, and I'd be happy to wait on that. I think Suzanne and I, who are going to continue chairing the public safety or health policy committee, would like to have a committee meeting in May with Natasha to discuss COVID specifically.
Thanks. Any other top thoughts or comments on committees before we move on? Okay, so then just talking about legislation in general, I'm going to echo what Chris said, right? I think we need to all use our common sense, and you know, those same sort of parameters that were outlined for committees, you can think about those for legislation as well. I just want to be transparent in conversations that I've had with the administration, in that they're very limited capacity to, at least under current status, that capacity should slowly begin to build up as things start to reopen, but that's going to be a gradual process. It's not going to be a sort of lights on kind of process. So that was sort of a summation of the conversation I had with Jason. And then with Kate, I talked to her about sort of the Department of Law and where they are sitting at. And in short, the Department of Law, they have some flexibility to work on the ordinances that we put forward, but they have somewhat diminished capacity working from home. So they can do more than they are doing right now, but they can't go sort of, as I've been telling folks, you know, back to full bore like we used to be, right? So there's a sweet spot in the middle that the administration can work with us on to move things forward. And we just need to be very cautious and thoughtful about that. So any comments specifically around legislation?
Felix, can you, oh, Chris wants to be in the queue too.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so the one legislative piece that I know of that I'm working with the administration on, but it's going slowly because it's they have the expertise, and this will be in the purview of the Economic Development Committee, is a newly allowed potential tax relief for building owners who put in kind of certain renewable energy elements into their projects. The legislature in this last session explicitly authorized us to provide a tax credit or tax abatement for renewable energy projects on homes. And so I'm working on that with the administration. There might be some other people also working on it. And that's the only project that I have that I'm kind of going to push in the next month or so at all. And that's because this conversation has been going on for a year and a half, and I don't want the pressure to fall away from that project.
Thanks, Chris. Austin?
Yeah, thanks. I agree. That's an important piece. I've been talking with Shayna and Shooty about it too, and thank Chris Constant for working on it. What was I going to note? It's left me. I'll have to come back.
Okay, just let me know. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the only legislation that I was planning on bringing, aside from, there's, as John alluded to, some home builder sort of housing affordability things that have been sort of ongoing and have been delayed by COVID. The other thing that's similar to that in the terms of it being delayed, and something that I pushed for a few months ago, was the domestic violence ordinance to remove survivors' names from our searchable database. Just this week, I got the draft back from the administration about what they can sort of live with. I had previously asked Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Zalatel to co-sponsor that with me, so I'm going to get them that revised draft, and then we'll have that conversation. But sort of similar to what Chris was saying, that's a sort of a long-standing thing. I think it's also something that has additional relevance right now. We know that domestic violence has been increasing around the country, or we suspect that it has been because of this crisis. So I still intend to bring that forward, assuming that we can get it to a point where I think it's still useful.
Thanks. And sort of trying to be cognizant of time, we do have one other important topic to talk about. So we have about another 25 minutes. So I'll go through the folks in the queue and then we'll move on. Austin?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot earlier. What I was going to ask is, what's the process? Is there any sort of determination for whether something makes sense? All of us will have things we might want to work on. Are we just supposed to individually kind of hold back to the extent we can? And do we just reach out to attorneys like we used to? And this might particularly be helpful for Jamie as she's getting up to speed too. Like, how do we initiate projects and decide when it's appropriate to do that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. And, I think we all have common sense. So I think we know what's important for us to think about now in the current space we're in. And I would say also initiate the conversations with the administration, and the administration will probably give you some pretty clear guidance on whether they think they can handle this right now or not.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, one other piece that I forgot to mention was that, we all heard about kind of a substantial grant for Merrill Field in the COVID CARES package. And there are like 3 parties looking for direction on this. One is a user group of pilots. One is the neighborhood who's impacted by the Merrill Field operations. And one, of course, is Merrill Field and its approved capital improvement plans. And so I do believe over the next several weeks, I will be proposing a meeting of the Enterprise Committee to discuss that appropriation and bring together those parties so we can have kind of the beginnings of a shared vision for what to do with a substantial increase in federal funding to that enterprise.
Thanks, Chris. Meg?
I'm good. Thanks. I'll pass.
Thanks. Okay, so then I want to talk just very briefly about work sessions before we go on to our third topic. So I will likely continue scheduling work sessions in the manner that Forrest has, which is not as many work sessions as before. And sort of, Jamie, I don't know if you have a way to relate to this, but usually on a Friday, we would have 6 hours of meetings back to back with work session after work session. That isn't gonna be possible, but as hot topics come up, we can definitely schedule work sessions. I think just generally, the more that we can answer questions offline and work with the administration that way, the better. Any quick comments on that? Okay, so then moving on to the last topic, and we definitely don't have enough time for this, but at least we can introduce it. So COVID-19 and assembly priorities. So I'm going to set the frame and then we can have an open discussion. But in short, I think right now there is a big opportunity for us to think in a big way, and for us to engage in conversations to protect our small businesses, vulnerable populations, and our essential workers. And just as sort of an aside from me, I think history would not look kindly on us if we simply go back to the old normal. So there are some obvious things that we can think about, right? The CARES Act funding, which the 156 million that's been in the news, plus other things that members have talked about. We can really think systematically with the administration on that. And, I don't want to steal Suzanne's thunder, but I think likely we'll be having a budget committee here soon for the budget and finance committee to start thinking about that. Less obvious things that we can think about, but still very relevant, engaging our banking institutions about the issues that our small businesses are having with PPP. And, we've all got hundreds of emails, right, from small business owners about different issues that they're having. So just to put those two out there, I think to frame the conversation of how do we want to engage in this, in shaping whatever this new normal looks like. And again, I just want to encourage everyone to think big about the conversations that we can be having. So that's the frame. I'll open it up to discussion. Ms. Kennedy, Crystal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Felix. We have definitely a need to focus on small businesses, but I guess at the same time, if we're talking big about looking at this in a big way, we actually need to look at the big businesses as well. We've had some major national corporations that have been shut down in the retail industry. And I think I mentioned it, last week or something, that even NSTAR was saying they're hearing from some of these large corporations that are worried about even paying their gas bill. So I don't want to exclude them. I mean, we certainly recognize that half of our businesses are small businesses, but at the same time, the impact, I believe, is much wider than that. So having said that, one of the organizations that we all know, the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, has really been the one that's been leading the conversations on how to deal with this as it impacts our businesses. And, certainly leading the way on the mayor's economic resiliency task force. So I would suggest that one of the things we could do would be to have a conversation with them. I know they're still in the process of collecting data and have done their second survey with the local businesses. So they may be a good jumping off point for us to help us kind of start to look at, okay, how do we do this? How do we recover? How do we do this better next time? I'm sure they have a range of thoughts on that. So I'd like to see them maybe give us an update from their perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Meg?
Thanks, Felix. So if we're thinking big, I think that the biggest barrier is communication and how to engage particular stakeholder or particular groups. Felix and I encountered this as we were trying to engage midtown small businesses that aren't necessarily the members of larger structures like the chamber or something like that. And we found out very quickly it is very costly unless everyone's plugged into Facebook or something like that. So as we talk about how we can maybe enter this new paradigm, I really want to, I think, stress the importance of this body thinking about strategic strategic communications and the way we can make sure we're reaching the people we need to reach and want to reach. And I think that might be thinking a little bit outside the box and considering different mechanisms and platforms, especially if our ability to convene in our traditional manner, which is in person, is not available. And we'll be having this conversation as well during the summer. And I think more than ever this summer, Anchorage will want summer and summer hard. I use summer as a verb there because I think it'll be a kind of bit of a release valve. So if there are ideas, I'm happy to work on that as part of the communications pillar, but I think it's something we really need to be dialoguing about and figuring out. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other thoughts about what Crystal said, Meg said, or any new thoughts? And, you know, I'll just say that it's important for me to sort of know what you guys are thinking, because I'm having conversations with the administration regularly about a lot of different subjects. Yeah, Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. Boy, this is so much fun pushing buttons and trying to get this in a hurry. But anyway, you know, the other thing is, I think I'm assuming that we'll have a much fuller debrief from the administration on a lot of different things. A lot of different things. I mean, I can't imagine this virus thing has been so far-reaching. There's so many cogs in this wheel. I think we're just going to have a really big conversation, and it may take us a few hours to actually try to wrap our hands around all the different ways that this is impacting our community and should be impacting either the way we change things or the legislation that we try to bring forward, or just the understanding that we maybe need to have in terms of what all has happened and might happen. So I would just, you know, as hard as it is at this time, and maybe we're not to the point yet where we can do that in any kind of summary type of a way, but I just think we need to have that really big conversation. It's almost like we have to have a COVID-19 debrief seminar. So I would just kind of keep that in mind, because like I said, there's just so much out there that we probably are getting bits and pieces of individually. So an opportunity to try to bring that into some kind of cohesive summary of what happened and where we need to move forward from here, I think would be a good thing. So thanks.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, and I think I guess the only comment that I'd make on that is the more clarity to the administration on sort of what exactly we want to know, I think the better information we'll have. And so I think, you know, if everyone wants to think about the sort of specific details that you want to know from the administration, we can definitely look at some type of debriefings on COVID-19. I know in our next work session that we're going to be starting shortly, in a half hour or so, we are going to get some type of talk and debriefing about COVID-19 as it relates to first quarter budget. But I think, Crystal, you're asking for a much broader perspective than just any one budget. And so that's definitely something that we can look at getting.
Well, I appreciate that, Felix. And I would just add that sometimes you don't know the right question to ask. And sometimes you don't get those questions until you have somebody else talking about something from a perspective that you just don't currently have. So that's what I think is the value in trying to have some of this debriefing before we even get to the point of saying, well, how do we fix this, or how do we address this? So thanks.
Got it. Thank you. All right. So before I move on to audience participation, any other comments on this topic or any other topics that we've talked about? Yeah, Meg.
Thanks. So I've been spending some time, and I don't know if this is helpful to the members or not, but kind of breaking down the very word-heavy notices and orders put out by the administration into infographics. I'm happy to, and Felix and I have been trying to share those. You know, if you like them, great. If you don't, okay. But if we wanted to use them potentially more universally, I want to figure out if there's a way to get adequate additional feedback. I'm not editorializing at all, except for maybe the little graphics I choose, but they're pretty much just simplified versions of the longer information being put out by the administration. So I just wanted to flag that if you didn't know that was happening, or if you had any specific input. I think it's one of the ways we can help or help facilitate communication with the public. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. Just give it another second to see if any other members have comments before I turn it over to the public. Okay, so seeing no other comments, then I'll go ahead and turn to audience participation. It looks like we have 3 folks, so I'm going to start with, and I'll just say generally you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and so 602-1667. If you want to speak, feel free to unmute, press *6.
No.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, yes, welcome. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. Last resident since September 30th, 1977, and currently a resident in the Matsu Valley. I'll be right on topic. You talk about a conversation with the public. You have meetings. And I do got to give you credit, okay, on the arranging the meeting. You clearly identify in the notice a phone number to call in so the public can call in and hear. That's very workable, and you're doing a good notice job there on these meetings with your family. But with regard to the scenario of your agendas, your packets of information there before you, on these committee meetings and work sessions, the public has no access to that information.
Hey there.
You have access to that information, but the public doesn't. So
Oh no! Which one?
Sorry, Chris, can you?
What's going on?
Sorry, someone wasn't muted. Go ahead, Eugene.
Okay, thank you very much. With respect. So before this health emergency, your past has been, and I repeated over the years, concern about on the website, the notices, the agendas, all that stuff. The agendas were not there. I would come to your committee meetings, as you are familiar with me, at the rooms, and I would pick up the materials at your meetings, and they would be handed out before the start of the meeting, basically, from Barbara or other staff, and I would have that material as a member of the public. But now that you've gotten this World Health Emergency, I have no access to get that information. You have information. You're getting reports from the administration, and you're discussing issues the public is totally blind to. Now, I understand this World Health Emergency, but your past has been you've not put it on the website on where the notices for that particular meeting, in particular the agenda. So saying that you want a conversation with the public, you're not encouraging the situation. You're just still discouraging the situation as not a complicated issue to address it and clean it up. Simply go where that notice is and have the agenda and any presentations the administration or you are having in those committee meetings so that the public can see before that meeting starts, way in advance, where they want to listen on and be part of that conversation. And again, I wish you the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will go back to the 602-1667, give you one more chance. Again, to unmute yourself, it's *6. Okay, then I'll go ahead and move on to 854-5349. Oh, it looks like you just unmuted yourself. So did you want to speak, 602?
I feel like this is Cameron. This is me. So
okay.
I don't need to speak. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks, Cameron. All right. So then moving on to 854-5349. If you would like to speak, you can unmute yourself. It's *6, and you'll have 3 minutes. Okay, it looks like that is Jamie. We're gonna have to figure out how to finesse that a little bit. But okay, it looks like we don't have any other members of the public. And we'll go ahead, adjourn this meeting, and we'll see everyone at 1 o'clock. Thanks.